Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our panel on steps to write and sell your novel. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our three novelists, and we'll get started right away. So our first panelist is Donna Levin. Donna Levin is the author of Extraordinary Means, California Street, and the recent bestseller, There's More Than One Way Home. Her new novel, He Could Be Another Bill Gates, was published by Chickadee Prince Books in October 2018. Elisa Bonnin was born and raised in the Philippines, after which she moved to the United States to study chemistry and later oceanography. After completing her doctorate, she moved to Germany to work as a postdoctoral scientist. A lifelong learner, Elisa is always convinced that she should maybe take a class in something, and as a result has amassed an eclectic collection of hobbies, but writing will always be her true love. Publishing a book has been her dream since she was 8 years old, and she is thrilled to finally be able to share her stories. She is the author of Dauntless and Stolen City. Troy Wilderson is a New Orleans-born, Midwest-based writer, senior prose feedback editor for Type House Literary Magazine, educator, and freelance copy editor. Her short fiction has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and appeared in Roanoke Review, the Tishman Review, Crack the Spine Anthology 17, the Louisville Review, Notre Dame Review, Friction, Still the Journal, and Cobalt Weekly, among others. Her teaching approach is hands-on, and she strives for inclusivity. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Spalding University and is a 2019 McKnight Foundation Writing Fellow. Thank you three for being here. So I'm just gonna ask y'all some questions and you can answer them in no particular order. And after this, we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A. So to start, I'd love to know if you could give one piece of advice for novelists who want to finish their novel, what would it be?
I hope you don't mind my jumping in here, but and that would be finish the novel. Don't get distracted by what I like to think of as the younger, prettier idea that comes along when you're about a third of the way or halfway through the first novel you're writing, and think, boy, this is getting really tough. But I have this other idea, and that's the novel I was really meant to write. So I'm going to put this first one aside and write this other one instead. And common, tempting phenomenon, and I suggest stick with the one you started. The challenges of novel, the real challenge of the novel are in the second half and the final third. Even if this isn't the novel that's destined you for greatness, you will learn by finishing it. So that's my one piece.
I think kind of jumping off of what Donna said, I would also say that if you want to finish your novel, you definitely have to just keep writing it until you get to the end. I think it's 100% normal to feel like what you have on the page is not as good as what you've imagined in your head. And I think, especially with a long project like a novel, you get to a point where you are just convinced your writing is terrible. You have no idea if any of this is any good, or if anyone will ever want to read this, or if this story is the story that you really want to commit your time to. But I think this is something that everybody hits. And after you push through that point, when you read back over what you've written, you usually find it isn't so bad after all. And also so many things can be fixed in editing. So if you find yourself losing confidence, try to push through it and just get to the end of the novel, because so many things can be fixed once you have a first draft. A first draft really only needs to exist.
It's true. For me, I find that people sometimes get stuck on a really tough scene or something that's really just causing them to lose faith in themselves. And I say it's okay to put in brackets, tough scene here, and keep writing and come back to it. Just keep writing. I think that's the most important thing, is that you need to keep writing, and if you're in a flow, to stay in your flow and just write. And also, if you can set goals, set time aside, or set a daily word count for yourself that you want to meet. You may not meet it every day. Nobody meets their daily. I mean, Stephen King probably does, but set goals for yourself and have some mileposts that you really think you can meet and try and go for it.
Thank you. There's a quote somewhere around the internet that goes, you can edit a bad page, you can't edit a blank page.
I think that's Jodi Picoult.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jodi Picoult. So that being said, how do you actually know when a novel is finished?
I recently came across somebody, the quote, that novels aren't finished, they're abandoned, which is kind of a negative way to look at it. But I will say that I think when you find yourself putting back things that you just took out, or taking out things that you just put in, and changing proper nouns to pronouns and vice versa, that's a sign that you may have taken the book as far as you can for now, even if it possibly needs work.
I think that's the exactly same thing I would say. What I call it is when you find yourself not making it better, just making it different. Mm-hmm. That's when you can kind of say, right, that's it.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. When you hit that point of diminishing returns where the amount of work that you're putting in isn't really measurably changing the story or improving it in any way, you're just kind of shifting things around, then it might be a good time to get a second pair of eyes on it, or it might be done.
That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of novelists might struggle with knowing whether or not the story is finished, whether or not the story is complete. Do you have any tips on that? Like how you know whether or not you have a complete story?
Well, no, please go ahead.
I say you should try and write a synopsis. That will show you if you have a story and if there are plot holes or any of those things. And you can use that as a guidepost to see where you're missing things. And if you can't, if your synopsis doesn't hold up, then you know you've got some work to do.
I think that's excellent advice. And when it comes time to market the book too, I mean, you're going to have to be able to do that, to tell somebody very quickly what the story is about. I was also going to say that I hope you're getting feedback as you write. Feedback's a double-edged. There are times when you need to write without feedback. And then getting feedback is always tricky because you've got to get feedback from the right people, people who are really on your side. But, that can be a guide that can give you some guidance as well.
Is there anything you would add to that, Elisa?
No, I mean, that's excellent advice. Lately, my books are finished when I hit the deadline and need to send them. So I would say I definitely need to try that synopsis trick to see if there's anything I can add to them before I send them out. Yeah.
I need to try that deadline trick. So
yeah, I mean, it helps when you have somebody who's expecting to see it by a certain date, because then you can say, okay, I don't think it's finished, but this is what I have, and you can see. Well, you can collaborate with someone. Yeah.
Definitely.
I absolutely need deadlines, and I have to make them up if necessary. I'm in a writing group that theoretically at least meets bi-weekly, and that helps because I don't want to be the one who shows up without something. But if maybe I have to make up, well, by the time I leave for this trip, not that I go on so many trips, believe me, but by the time I leave for this trip, I have to produce such and such, or meet this particular milestone. So, yeah. And then somehow convince myself that something terrible will happen if I don't meet the deadline, but I absolutely need deadlines.
I mean, even before I was published, I would set deadlines for myself, even though nobody was expecting the book and nobody would be looking for it. I would just say, okay, it has to be done by this date. And then by then, usually I could evaluate and see how much more work needed to be done.
Sure. So once the book, or I guess I should say, once the first draft is done, obviously you're going to go through the revision process. How many revisions do your novel drafts typically go through?
No, please go ahead.
No. Oh, thanks, Donna. So I write, just for context, my books are YA fantasy. And I, prior to being published, I would do about 3 revisions on my own on average, but it really depends on the book before sending it out to agents and seeing what I can do. Now I have an agent, I have an editor. I do fewer revisions on my own. If I'm lucky, I can do 2 revisions, but sometimes I just have to send it and say, okay, here's my almost first draft, help me. So I think like now that I have people to work with, my own revisions have gotten a lot shorter, but with my agent, normally 1 or 2, and then with my editor, another 3. I think I'm on round 3 with this latest book, and I don't know when we're gonna stop, so we'll see how it goes.
I was gonna say, for me, in the age of word processors has dramatically changed my concept of draft. Not necessarily for the better. It's just, in some ways, it's very liberating to go. I mean, I grew up I learned to type on a manual typewriter, so, you know. But to make the answer a little shorter, I think the most recent novel had, I would say, 7 drafts. But, you know, it's a real, it depends kind of question. And if you're working with an editor and a contract, you're in a much better position than most of us are most of the time. So that's great. It's only good.
Yeah, I would say on average, probably a good solid 5. And that's the first couple are me just getting it in a shape that I can show people. And then around with readers, and then around with my editor, or 2 rounds with my editor. So that's generally the process that I go through.
Okay. That's getting into my next question, which is, what do you do in each set of revisions? Like, is the first revision focusing on anything in particular? Or does every novel kind of have its own revision process? What does that kind of look like for each of you?
Well, for me, I mean, what I want to just tell everyone, including myself, is don't be afraid to take something apart, or do be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. Because, and certainly for me, the most challenging part of a revision is the plot, because it's like a Rubik's Cube. You know, you get all the orange squares on one side, great. But now the white squares don't, how do you get the white squares to work without moving the orange squares? Or when you know, there's a kind of ripple effect that every change you make in the plot, you know, has. So, I mean, that's certainly what I attack first. And readers, even of very literary fiction, they want a plot, they want a story, they're reading for the story. And that's okay. You know, they're not reading to find out how I feel about things particularly. I want them to find out how I feel about things, but they're reading to know what happens next. So, you know, that's the hardest, and that's where I will start and persuade myself not to try to take a shortcut and say, well, you know, it's a slow beginning. Well, the middle sags. Well, you just got to do it anyway.
I write everything in longhand. So for me, the very first revision is transcribing it from longhand into the computer. So the first draft is just getting the story down. The second draft is getting the language where I want it and getting things smoothed out and looking for the plot holes and all of that, things that I may have glossed over as I was writing frantically, and getting it into shape. But that's built in, it's inherent in that second draft, that I'm making it more artful looking for better word choices and all of that good stuff, and looking for better craft and all of that. And then subsequent ones are for the more fine-tuned things. Characterization, is that coming through? Is the art coming through? Do I have all of my 3 acts in place? All of the good things that you need to do. But the first revision is really just getting it, the words in the right order and making sure that they're the best words. So that's my process.
I have to tell you, my hand cramped the moment you said you write longhand. That is very impressive. I really admire that.
It's just, I've always written longhand. So when I started writing novels, it's like, well, I just write better that way. I know it's an oddity.
Yeah, I guess in an ideal world, which I don't often get to live in, I try to do the big picture stuff first. So like Donna said, the plot for me is what I focus on in my first revision. Like, do I need to cut out subplots? Do I need to add subplots? Do I need to remove a character, add a character? Like the really big things that basically break the story. I try to get that out of the way first. And then every subsequent revision is cleaning up my mess, basically, like going back through it, making sure that things that have shifted out of place, I can put back into place, fixing the story so that it works. And then once the story works is when I go back through and adjust things like language, adjust the prose on a line level, and just make sure that I'm reaching all the goals that I had in mind when I started writing the story. So in an ideal world, it goes from like, here's the first draft, let's smash it to pieces, put it back in some kind of order, and then polish that as we keep going through. Yeah.
Thank you. So once you have a finished novel draft, what tips do you have for pitching to literary agents, or what should people think about when they want to pitch to one?
The first thing is that you have to put the agent under some obligation to read your work, or even your query letter, let alone simple pages, etc. And that's because of some prior ideally some prior connection. You've met them at a conference, you have a friend in common, and a Facebook friend in common is probably not enough, but some reason why they would be a bad person if they didn't spend 5 minutes looking at your query. And then beyond that, get their attention with something. All of it's the lovely prose and the powerful story is what will hold their attention and what will interest them in your work. But first you have to get them through that little door to actually, and so it's, boy, the grabber first line of the pitch. What if a serial killer was loose in your neighborhood? I am dismayed by how quickly editors and viewers default to the whole serial killer thing, but that was what came to mind. But what if you found out your husband had a secret life? Okay, that's probably been overdone, but something that gets somebody's attention. Probably nothing about their extended car warranty, or cryptocurrency, but just something that keeps them reading. And then you can ease into your more subtle insights about human nature.
Yeah. Take some time, actually sit down and take a substantial amount of time to develop your query letter, your pitch, and your first pages, because those are the things, like, even the rest of your book could be fantastic, but if you're not selling it in your query letter and you're not selling it in your first pages, you're not going to get an agent to take a chance on you and read the rest of your manuscript. So you need to make sure, especially that those first 50 pages or so are the best they can possibly be, that your query letter is the best it can possibly be, and that you're pitching your novel in an interesting way.
Yeah, I'd say you have all the pieces that they could possibly ask for ready to go. And if that means that they're asking for a 1-sentence pitch line, have that, have your synopsis done, have your query letter done, and I do the first 15 pages as my, make sure that the first 15, because that seems to be what a lot of folks ask for, is the first 15. Everybody's different. You'll get some that ask for 10, some that ask for 50, but 15 seems to be a very popular number. And I say your whole book should be stellar for one, but those first 15 are what you're going to put in the email to them or in Query Tracker, and that's what needs to shine.
I actually want to follow up on two things real quick. Donna, you said something about like meeting agents in person. So I'm curious if you could give any advice, like where does that happen? You mentioned conferences, but how do you meet agents other than just, cold emailing them from the internet?
Well, everything changed 3 years ago. And I met my first agent at a writers' conference in Squaw Valley. And that was the first thing I always advise people to do. And now I think the live conferences are coming back. And I'm sorry that, I love Zoom. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Zoom. Imagine that we've got people from all over the country, maybe all over the world together right now. But, seeing an agent's panel on Zoom isn't quite the same. Now, on the other hand, if you, I would take every opportunity you can to hear agents talk on Zoom, because then you can email them and said, I heard you speak on at such and such a time. And then there's, a relationship there. And by the way, I know that you represent cozy mysteries, and I've just written a cozy mystery, and I see you're from the same hometown that I'm from, or whatever it is. I'm not, how things have changed, because of the pandemic, of course, and then also because of social media, how that affects all of us, I'm not exactly sure yet. I can just say, you want to network as much as possible. You're in a writing group, and one of the other writing group members gets an agent. Well, I would not make your next 2 words to be congratulations, by the way, will you recommend me? But down the line, that opportunity might arise. And wow, I just took a class at San Francisco State Extension, years ago, and there was another woman in the class who was taking a workshop in Berkeley, and she told me about this workshop in Berkeley, and I went to that workshop and I met other people there. And it's a kind of you just get out there as much as possible. Here in San Francisco, there's a place called the Writer's Grotto, where I think people, I frankly don't belong, but I know a lot of people who do, and people rent space there and they hang out and schmooze and get to know each other and network. So I'll sum all that up. You just get out there, get involved, be as involved as you can with the writing community.
Thank you. And Troy, you said something about Query Tracker. Could you say a little bit about what that is?
That is a platform where agents can have you enter in your query as opposed to emailing them. It's a form page that they will ask you anything from listing similar books to adding your synopsis, as well as putting your query letter in there and your sample pages. Some people want more, some people want less, but it's Query Tracker also you can sign up and it will keep track of all of your queries. So you know what's out there, who's got it, what stage is that, and you can use it as instead of having an Excel spreadsheet like I do, you could have Query Tracker do the tracking for you.
Got it. Thank you. So Donna said that she found her agent from a conference. Troy and Elisa, how did you find your agents? Did you have to send a lot of queries? Did you use Query Tracker? What was your journey like?
I did everything back to front. So I don't know if my story is going to be the most helpful or relatable, because I still have no idea how I managed this, but somehow I didn't have an agent. I submitted my books to, at the time, Swoon Reads was like a crowdsourcing like an experiment being run by, it's an imprint under Fievel and Friends, which is in Macmillan. So they are a traditional publisher, but they were running this basically like social experiment where you had a website where you could post 1 to 2 of your young adult novels, and people on the site would read it and they would vote for which novels they really liked. And so I'd basically been burned out on querying. I'd been trying to query. I think I'd been trying to query without success for about like 10 years or so. So I posted both of my books up there, the books that eventually became Dauntless and Stolen City, and said, okay, I'm just going to forget about it for 6 months because that's how long these books had to be on the site. And after that 6 months, if nothing happens, I'm going to go back to querying. I promise. I'm just going to take a little break. And I actually set on my Google Calendar like the 6-month deadline. And on the day, I got an email from my publisher saying, can we talk about your books? And they ended up picking up both books. So I started without an agent, which I do not actually recommend doing. I wish I'd known, and this is something that people told me they could, if you ever find yourself in the situation where you're being offered a book deal and you don't yet have an agent, something that I wish I'd known I could do is you can actually query agents and put in the subject line, like offer received, urgent, and you can actually tell them I need to hear from you in 2 weeks. Or some amount of time, and you can quickly get to the front of the line to be reviewed so that you can at least have someone helping you through the publishing process. Because when I did eventually get an agent in a much more inefficient way later by querying while I was also publishing my books, my agent came in, looked at my publishing contracts, and were like, we could have done a little bit better here, and we could have helped you out a little better. So with my third book, which I was agented for, my agent actually helped me get slightly better terms, a better advance, and things like that. So you definitely don't want to go into publishing unagented, even if and especially if your publisher pinky swears that you really don't need an agent because this is going to be absolutely okay and they'll take care of you. So.
Never.
If you don't mind, I tell a story that goes back a few days, like most of my stories do. I mean, a few decades, most of my stories do. But in this workshop I was in, one woman who was working on a novel said that she heard that agents were starting to take 15%, not 10. And I said, I can't wait to have that problem.
Thank you.
That's as good as the story gets, but you know.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Lesson learned, never trust a pinky swear.
Yeah.
Troy, what was your experience like?
Well, I'm actually in the trenches now. I have met with agents one-on-one in a couple of different forums. At a conference was one where I got guidance on my first 15 pages and my query letter and my synopsis. And then another one where it was an agent who was offering a service to read your query letter and your synopsis and your first 15 pages and work with you on that. So I had a query letter guru work with me on the query letter and the synopsis and my first 15 pages. And I also I'm a developmental editor, so I also help people work with their first 15 pages. So I am actually looking through primarily contacts in the writing community, looking at books and seeing who's representing people that I write like, and people that I know who have just signed with agents. And currently it's like I have an agent who I worked with at a literary journal, and they're now an agent. So they're holding my query right now.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So how do you know when an agent is going to be a good fit for your work?
A little like asking, how do you know that, I gotta be careful because I think my husband's gonna watch this recording. How do you know this marriage is going to work? And actually, it's very much, well, I've been married 37 years, so I guess that was okay. But moving on quickly. I think you're looking for a certain amount of enthusiasm on the part of the agent for your work, and a sense that that agent understands you as a writer, the type of writer you are, and you need good, and there's good communication, that they respond to your emails, and oh my God, maybe phone calls or texts, but at the same time, you are likely a new client, and you may be completely unknown, and don't expect, it's like any relationship. I mean, you have to have sort of realistic expectations for how much time and attention this agent's going to give you. So, I mean, that's kind of telling you, what expectations you want to have on your side. I think, once you get an agent and there's that kind of excitement and you think, oh boy, now all my problems are solved. Agents don't sell everything they represent. It's unclear what percentage, and I would never venture a guess. But so I want some commitment on the part of the agent that they're not going to quit sending your work around after 5 no's. I've seen that. That's kind of unfortunately a bit of a pattern. They love it. It's great. It's high, and we're going to make $500,000. And then 3 editors say no, and they, oh, well, maybe I was wrong. So somebody who's going to be in it for the long haul, and nobody's in, there's no guarantee they're going to be in it forever, that you're going to want to be in it forever. But, that is definitely one, something I would get clear about early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm looking for someone who's even more excited about my book than I am. That's what you really want. You want somebody who you feel is going to champion your book for a year or two as they go through the editing process and the subbing process. They've got to be excited when they talk to editors about your book. And you really need someone who's enthusiastic and will stay enthusiastic. And I think what Donna was saying is that you really want to know that your communication skills match up. And if they are going to submit to 5 houses or 15 is a question that you should have in the phone conversation before you sign with them. Do you have a game plan? What's your game plan? Are you planning for a long haul with this, or are we going to give it our top 10 shot and then be done, and kind of get a gauge for what their plan might be? They probably won't tell you their exact plan. They're not going to name houses probably, but they can give you a range of, I think I'll probably send this out to 12, or we can shoot for these 3, or whatever their plan may be, and see if that aligns with your vision for what you want to do with the book.
And also mention, I'm sure everyone would do this without me saying it. Google that person, look into that. Now this is one of the benefits of modern life, which is you can find out what other people have said about this agent online. It doesn't mean that if anybody has a complaint that's necessarily a strike against the agent, because who doesn't have somebody complaining about them in daily life? But it's easy enough to get now on, Publishers Marketplace, or just that thing called the internet, and just find out what their track record is like, what kind of books they've sold, and what other clients' experiences have been. Tell you the truth, you're probably going to find out more than you want to know, or more than you need to know.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you're already in the stage where the agent is talking to you and is interested in your book, you can ask them, could I reach out to some of your clients and ask them how their experiences with you have been like? When I was at that stage, all of the 3 agents that I was talking to gave me email addresses of their clients, and I reached out to them, and I got some pretty honest feedback from all of them. Because probably like the agent's current client base is going to be very, like, they're going to be where you're going to end up being in a few months if you end up signing with this person. So ask and see. I mean, it's kind of the same. I went to grad school, and when we were having to pick a grad school advisor, we were always told, like, get their current students alone in a room without them and ask what's the actual situation here. So definitely do your research. There's a list of questions in a blog post done by Jim McCarthy, I think. And it has like all the sensible questions you should ask your agent, just to make sure that you and the agent are on the same page. So definitely go through and ask those. Make sure that the agent aligns with your vision, not only for this book, but also for your career, because remember that if this book fails, you're going to want to submit another book, or if this book succeeds, you're probably still going to want to submit another book. So make sure that this agent is interested not just in this particular book, but in everything that you might want to write. And at the end of the day, after you've gotten through all your homework, after you've done everything right on paper, there's a lot of like gut feeling in it too. Like, did you connect with this person? Is this somebody that you felt like you could talk to about your project, your ideas, your fears? Because this is the person that you're going to ask to advocate for you with your publisher. So if you're not comfortable telling your agent, I don't like this, or I'm not sure about this, or I don't know how I feel about these changes that the editor wants in my book, or this cover design, or this marketing plan, if you feel like this is not somebody you can reach out to and ask those questions, then this might not be the best agent for you and for your book. And it's really, really hard to hear, but no agent is better than a bad agent. So don't resist the urge to jump at the first thing that comes your way if you have a gut feeling it's going to be terrible, or if you and this person just don't align.
I'll just throw in something you probably already know, but if an agent should never ask you for any money other than money they've earned for you. That's an immediate red flag flying. And they should not be asking you for reading fees. They should not be asking you for an advance on their expenses. Just run.
Thank you. I've got just a couple more questions for y'all, and then we'll move to the Q&A. So what is your top advice for anyone who wants to write and query their first novel? And you may have already given that advice, but.
Be patient. If it's your first novel, then you might have an idea of how quickly things will go. And you need to extend that timeline by a few months, years. Novels are very, very slow. Even now, I feel like I'm going as fast as I can with this third book, which was written basically completely under contract, which is unbelievable. And I've never had this happen in my life. And it's still going to be 3 years from first draft to publication. The books that I wrote before all of these things started happening for me, my first books, I think we're looking at 5 years, 6 years, basically, between the time that I sat down to write this book and the time it ended up on the shelves. So novels are slow. Don't beat yourself up about it if it takes longer than you expect. Just be patient and take things one step at a time.
And I would add the most tried advice of all, which is write a good book. But what that means is don't send it out until it really is as ready it can be, because with these contacts that you work so hard to make, you'll get one shot. These agents are going to come back and say, well, there's this good and this good, and I like this, but no, it's not going to work for me. And then you don't get to come back and say, oh, well, I'll do another draft since you like this part and this part. I'll just rewrite it one more time. It doesn't work that way. And if you've ever worked with an agent in an agent's office, you have a lot more sympathy for them. They're overworked and underpaid. So anyway, you're going to get that one shot. So be sure when you take it, you're ready.
You're ready. Yeah, I had the good fortune of submitting my novel to a contest, and it didn't win, but one of the editors it was a Random House imprint, sent me notes. So I had that to edit before I started querying. So I did a revision based on an editor from one of the big five to help refine my novel so that it was the best. And I felt much more comfortable saying, oh, I can query this now. It's not just a contest. This is the big leagues. And I feel like I've got as much as I can into this. I can't edit it anymore. And your editor might have some editorial vision for your book too. So there's that. That's also something to discuss if you are looking to sign with someone, if they have thoughts on revisions, because lots of them will.
Really fast, because I want to have enough time for Q&A. Do y'all have any advice for promoting yourself as a novelist before and after your novel is published?
I'm going to go last on that one, I'll tell you that.
I would say if you're writing a novel, everybody says that it doesn't matter to have a platform, but I say have a community. See about building your writing community, whether it's making Facebook friends. I've made Facebook friends with, editors at publishing houses that I want to publish my book at. And you never know when you might be able to see them in real life and make friends with other writers so that you can find out which agents to pitch and all of that good stuff. So it's a community. You need to have a community, a writing community surrounding you. And that's the most important thing. That's the best platform you can have. As far as Twitter followers, it doesn't matter so much for a novelist. Having contacts either through maybe Twitter, but maybe through Facebook, but maybe through your local writing, through the Writer's Grotto, or here in Minneapolis, it's the Loft, or whatever, Sack Street, or, Hugo House in Seattle. Wherever you are, there's a writing community that you can tap into. And you should absolutely tap into it. Make writer friends. Make friends with writers who are published that can be mentors. That's the best advice. And the best way to have a platform, if you want to call it that.
I think Troy put that really, really well. And I couldn't agree more strongly. It is about community. And others just occurred to me that while we're talking, I have, if I know somebody who's published a book, I immediately buy it. And it's okay, it's a little bit because then they might buy mine, but seriously, so many people people love to give you advice, and people love to say, oh, well, good luck with that. Nothing says thank you and I appreciate you like buying the darn book. So anyone I know who's published a book, immediately I got and buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do the same. And I have something I am one of those few people I'm still on Twitter, and I have something called reading and quaffing. And whenever I buy a friend's book, I take a picture of it with whatever I'm drinking at the time. And just to show my support, whenever a friend comes out with a new book, and whenever one of my clients comes out with their book, I tweet about their book too. And
Yeah.
you know, it's all good publicity for everybody.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's great. I like that.
Yeah, I'm in the
it's fun.
second and third finding a community. For obviously, you can find your community, like Troy and Donna mentioned, before you get published. After I got a book contract, I realized that you could actually get together with all the other people who were debuting in the same year as you. So we actually had a big Slack group, everyone who was debuting in 2022. And we had a name for ourselves, we had a hashtag, and we basically just commiserated and promoted each other's work. And that experience for me was super valuable, because writing can feel very isolating, even outside of promoting your work. Like, as a writer, you feel like you're in a bubble, and all these terrible things that might only be happening to you. All these feelings that you might be having about your book, your insecurities, might only be happening to you. And it was really eye-opening to be in a space with other writers where I could say, hey, I'm not feeling great about having to promote my work on social media, and everybody else could be like, oh yeah, me too, like, let's do it together. That kind of support, I'm still friends with some of those people, and I still support their books. And it's just great to have that kind of community.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much. So we're going to use the rest of this hour for Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat and I'll read them out. While you are thinking of questions to ask, I'm going to say real quick, Donna Levin has a class coming up called Get Back to That Book. So if you've started a book and you put it down and now you want to pick it back up and finish it, take that with her. It's on June 17th and 24th. It's a 2-session workshop. Elisa Bonnin has a 10-week class coming up starting on June 21st. That's battling the blank page, writing the first third of your novel. So if you want to write the first third of your novel, go ahead and enroll in that.
Or as much as you can.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And Troy Wilderson has just started a class called First Pages that will pull agents in. But if you have a start of your novel and you want to workshop it, Troy is wonderful to work with.
Thanks.
So, your questions. Philip asks, would you ever ask an agent to give you some of their successes and failures?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you definitely should ask them what
Yeah.
they're going to do if your book doesn't sell. Yeah.
Sure.
And-
Brooke, or did you want to say anything else?
Well, and again, it should be pretty, you can find a lot of that online now, for better or worse, also.
True.
Okay. Brooks asks, earlier in the conversation, there was a comment about receiving feedback from the right person. How do you determine who that is?
That's also, it's difficult in that my motto is share with care. You don't want to, you usually don't want to go show to your sister or your best friend, or unless that person is also a writer, but somebody who's just interested. People are curious. I'm a writer. Oh, really? Let me see some of your work. And then before you know it, they've read the first chapter and lost interest or whatever. But getting into a classic Writers on the Net is, and I'm not just joking about that either, is a really good place to start. You're going to have instructors who've been vetted and who are managing the feedback and make so after that, it becomes a question of, as we discussed with the agent, of who do you trust?
Right.
I guess, I said that whole, right person thing because I know there's always the risk of, I have a friend who paid a lot of money to an editor. This is in the YA genre too, and who really just undermined her. And after paying a lot of money, my friend was left feeling nothing but discouraged. And that angered me profoundly, actually. But I don't know what process my friend went through to find this particular person. I know this editor was well respected and was earning a lot of money from other writers for the same thing. But yeah, with more time, maybe I can come up with more criteria. But you need feedback, but you don't want to be careless about whom you share your work with. In some,
I mean, the holy grail, right, is somebody who loves your idea just enough to want to read it all the way through and help you make it the best it can be, but not so much that they're going to say everything's great. Like somebody who can spot the flaws but still believes in your concept and your idea and encourages you to fix your work, rather than makes you feel discouraged, like you can't, like it's not worth continuing. And that can be really hard to find, like out in the wild. But if you're in writing groups, if you're in a writing community, like look for people who write similar things to what you write. So people who are in the same genre as you, people who might have the same interests as you, and see if they might be interested in like a trade. So
yeah, if you're exchanging work with somebody right there, you have kind of a leg up in that. They're not going to be randomly cruel to you because you can be randomly cruel right back. So,
Well, I think I always try to find people whose writing I admire and ask them to read my work. And usually it's someone from my writing community that I know will read it with care. So that's really what I aspire to have my writing friends read my work. And people that I think that will be critical enough of it, but supportive also.
yes, I mean, I've been focusing on the need to, not have somebody be mean, for lack of a more sophisticated word, but you also need help. You want specific input about how you can make something better.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So Philip asks, you agree to work with an agent, you send your manuscript, and she doesn't recommend any or many changes or edits. Is that true, or do you find that you do get a lot of feedback on your manuscript from an agent?
depends, right?
Well, agents aren't editors, and we shouldn't expect them to be. So, and editing a manuscript, as we all know, is work. This is where, when you're starting out, it's kind of tempting to say, oh, hey, take a look at this and tell me what you think. Well, when somebody asks me that, I would, of course, I would do that for a friend, somebody I haven't, a relationship with. But I don't think people always appreciate that. Just reading something, I have a finite amount of reading time. So reading and critiquing something is work. So I sort of got off with the agent. So most agents don't have the time to do a lot of editorial work. That's too bad. And sometimes they have, interns, et cetera, who can do more of that. But I don't think we should expect them to be editors also.
I
You
see
find,
that
Jane, you
Philip
might
also
find-
posted a follow-up to this question. So the follow-up reads, do I trust her, or as I've been hearing, is she just dumping it in her round file?
Well, I would get in touch with her and see what's going on, certainly. You know, and it's if I say give her 4 weeks, it's a little bit arbitrary. But if you're not, when you say do you, in other words, are you, is this agent coming back and saying, oh, it's ready to go, or coming back, what's the agent coming back with? Or is she just not coming back?
I would maybe gauge the agent's level of investment in your work, because if she's like really excited saying, okay, it's basically almost done and we can just send it to editors, that might be a different thing from if the agent is just not answering your questions about what state the manuscript is in and doesn't seem that interested or invested in your work. And I think that's something that if you're in the situation, that's something that you need to sit and think about and judge.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. So first, Chris asks, how long do you wait before you edit your manuscript? How much distance do you give when you finish the first draft when you come back to it?
That's, well, let me say not too long for sure, because you do tend to forget. Or maybe I should say I forget. I'm sometimes amazed at how quickly I forget those things.
A month for me is ideal, but it depends again on your time constraints. Sometimes I only get a week, sometimes I don't get that. So
a few weeks for me is usually enough. That's usually when I can say I can look at it with fresh eyes. I've stepped away for long enough. Anything longer than that gets to be maybe too long. But it depends. I mean, that's an individual question. You know how much distance you need to put between yourself and a manuscript before you can come at it without seeing the same thing that you saw before. So with fresh eyes, that's kind of an individual thing. There's no rule, I guess, is the answer I'm looking for. There's no rule of thumb as to how long you should wait.
The problem that we deal with every day is that there's no rule about any of this stuff.
Right.
And the longer I'm at it, the more I know I don't know anything.
I think the best thing to do is find the rhythm that works for you as an individual writer. And unfortunately, that's also going to change from project to project and as you grow as a writer. So yeah, we can give you what works for us, but you're going to have to figure out what works for you and your book.
Yeah.
So last question, and I suppose that's related to what you said, Donna, about not knowing anything. What advice do y'all have for dealing with writing-based insecurities?
Writing-based insecurities.
No, please, no.
I think you just have to put your head down and write. And, everybody, just know that every writer has insecurities. That's just kind of, you'll feel, some days you'll feel great, some days you won't. And you still have to continue writing and not give in to the fear that you're not good enough or compare yourself to others. I had someone who said, your competition are not other writers, that your competition's in the library. So don't ever compare yourself to your friends and what they're doing and how well they're going or how quickly they got an agent or how quickly their book came out or any of that. Everybody has their own track, their own path, and their own insecurities. So you just have to just say, yeah, I'm going to have days where I really just don't feel like I'm all of that, but you have to just keep your head down and keep writing. That's all there is to it. Just keep at it. If you really, Richard Bach said, I think it's Richard Bach said, a writer is an amateur who didn't quit. That's what you have to kind of just remember that.
And I like remind myself, John Gardner said that nothing is harder than being a novelist, except unless being a novelist is all one wishes to be, in which case, well, being a novelist is hard. Everything else is harder.
Yeah.
That-
Having that writing community definitely helps also. If you have a supportive community and you have these insecurities, you can use your community as a sounding board to be like, is this something that happens to everyone, or is this just me and my project? Like, is my project really not working, or is this a phase that we all go through? And having other writers to sound off can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I think it was Hemingway who said, we're all apprentices in a craft where no one ever becomes a master. So,
Right.
you know, whatever you think about Hemingway, he was right about that. Well, Elisa, Donna, Troy, thank you so much for your time. This has been really wonderful and eye-opening, and I appreciate all of your insight. Again, Elisa and Donna have classes coming up very soon. If you're interested in learning more about novel writing from them, please check out our calendar. And thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone.